Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. Matthew Dickerson. Tech Talk. Tech Talk. Sit back and relax. It's time to talk technology.
Hello, wormhole hunters and travellers through space and or time. Folks, it's time to cool your jets, ease off your thrusters, and settle in for a dose of what's good for you. It's time to check in with your future, and when I say that, I mean it's time for a little tech talk and goodness. And when I say tech talking, I mean it's the best sort of tech talking there is, and that's Tech Talking with Matthew Dickerson. Get up out of your chairs, folks. Give a rousing round of applause for the bloke with all the inside scoops. Welcome, Matthew Dickerson.
It's a shame it's only one-way communication. That's. I was waiting for that. I was waiting for the cheering.
I really want some Muppet sound effects. If we can just hit a button and hear the cheer from the Muppet crowd, that'd be awesome.
As long as we don't have the two guys in the peanut gallery.
Boo, boo. Yeah.
But it would be nice to have two-way communication, wouldn't it? It's one of the things I've often thought about when I've spoken to radio hosts. Obviously, a podcast is not live, but even when a radio host talks on the radio, he's talking and he doesn't, or he or she doesn't really know.
There's not a lot of feedback there.
If there's anyone. And you might be talking to yourself.
If you're doing the late night shift, is there anyone?
That's right. I actually rang a radio station when I was very young, and I was sitting there in my sister's bedroom. There's a couple of sisters I had there in the bedroom, and we were listening to the radio, and the guy said, "There goes Marsha Hines. She must have swallowed a radio because she's got the music in her," as one of her big hits.
Thought,
and I thought,
well done.
That was pretty funny. So I rang the guy and said, "That was pretty funny." That gave me a bit of a chuckle. And he said, "Thank you." And he said that to me. He said, "I never know whether anyone's listening to my show. I could be speaking to myself for all I know."
What if you go home and just talk to yourself as well as one of those
Maybe.
radio hosts? Yeah.
So this week I've had an interesting story that I didn't witness, but one of my children who's at New South Wales University of New South Wales, saw a hydrogen-powered hairdressing truck.
Wow.
And I didn't know there was a lot of power needed for a hairdresser, a set of clippers, probably not that much.
So hang on, the truck was hydrogen powered, or the hairdressing studio was hydrogen powered, or both?
Or everything. And that was my first question when my daughter rang me and said, "I've just seen this cool thing, hydrogen powered." I said, "So what, the clippers are powered by hydrogen?" Maybe they've got some electric clippers rather than scissors, but they're demonstrating what you can do with hydrogen. So they basically have this truck that's set up powered by hydrogen to drive around to different places and then pull up and say everything in here, or the electricity, the locomotion from A to B, where we're moving it from, everything's powered by hydrogen, just to show off that you can use hydrogen for a whole range of things. So they take this round, and I thought it was an interesting thing that hairdressing is the way you're going to get people in. So we're doing free haircuts powered by hydrogen. Of all the strange things to come up with to try and get people interested, I thought it might have been a gaming van.
I wonder if you could set up a hydrogen-powered cafe.
Something like that, yeah. This barista's hydrogen-powered, but hairdressing. And I thought, well, maybe that's not a bad thing because you get
one
people...
place to start.
That's right. I kind of thought that, but they've taken it apparently out to some ag shows to have it sitting there. And I thought maybe when people are busy, they don't get time to get a haircut, and suddenly they've got a 5 or 10 minute spare and they're out looking around. I'll go on there and sit and have my haircut. But it was a different angle.
Yeah, I think you're asking the question why. I'm saying why not?
Yeah,
why not a hydrogen-powered hairdressing studio?
Why not? Well, there you go. So that was interesting, but it does show that we're getting more movement in terms of alternative power sources for a whole range of things, including hairdressing studios that are mobile.
It's happening. It's happening. Before our very eyes. Now, in today's episode, we'll be floating off into the Outback, loaded up with whatever goodies you wish to move. Regional and remote trucking routes are heading gently skyward, folks. Now, here at Tech Talk, we love our 3D printing, and now we're all about printing organs for transplant. And if you're all about sustainability, well, what do you think about wooden satellites? Sounds medieval, but a bunch of aerospace engineers have gotten a very, very crafty over their satellite designs there. But let's kick off today with a story all for the bird watchers out there. Now, these guys don't like to miss a trick. If there's a rare, twittery something flittering from bough to bough, bird watchers are going to need a positive ID and they're going to need to get it pronto. If this is you, then you best get yourself a pair of AI-enhanced binoculars and get them quick. You'll be the envy of the woodland. Just keep your noise down and all the oohing and ahhing. Yeah, keep that down. Matt?
I am actually the target audience for this. I can spot a magpie because they're normally the ones that are pecking my helmet.
Good. That's good bird watching, yeah.
And that's about it. It's a bird,
right.
and I have zero skills in identifying various birds. So I need technology.
But you know a magpie because it's the one pecking at your helmet.
That's right. So I can identify a magpie.
Right.
Yeah. And sometimes I get confused with a peewee and a magpie.
Oh, right.
But the peewee doesn't tend to attack me, so I go, that's a peewee. And then the one that attacks me, that's a magpie.
Some of us would just say, pay more attention, Matt.
Maybe. I got other things to think about.
You need a pair of binoculars that are AI.
I do, and that's exactly right. Now, a friend told me about a concept called Global Big Day. I'd never heard about it.
Right.
But maybe that's because I can only identify a magpie, and that's it, because Global Big Day is organised by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. Every year since 2015, 11th of May, I think it's 11th of May each year, but maybe it's on a certain day of the week around the 11th of May, they ask people across the world to identify as many different species as they can around their particular area.
Wow.
And, of course, take a photo and upload it to the app. This year, 66,728 e-birders from basically every nation around the world logged 7,845 species in a single day.
Wow.
So it's a pretty big event. Now, for me, I might have been able to add to that if I took a photo of a magpie, but I didn't know about Global Big Day when it was on this
But
year.
now you do.
Next year.
Look
Next
out.
year. So what I need, because I might see a blue-footed booby or a fluffy-backed tit babbler, and I wouldn't know I was looking at that, but these binoculars are brilliant. They're like a normal set of binoculars. You look through them, you see things up close compared to what you would see them with the naked eye. But they've got a little red circle in there. And if you focus that little red circle on a bird, on any bird, and press the button, it will identify that with accuracy around about 85%.
Oh, wow.
Which isn't too bad.
Yeah,
It's
that's
better than
pretty
me.
good.
Yeah, it's better than mine.
And when it diagnoses, when it identifies a bird that's really, really rare and turns out to be a magpie, that 15% of the time it gets wrong. But I still think 85%, that's really good.
Yeah, it is pretty impressive. So, and they think that'll keep improving as they get more examples. And obviously when you identify birds, if you think it's got it wrong, you can actually say, no, this is definitely a different type of bird than the one that you've identified there. So it will keep learning because it's using AI to keep learning that. The great part about it is that this information is all stored on the binoculars, so it doesn't need external access.
So you can be out
Correct.
in whoop whoop.
Because that was one of the things I thought of. That maybe some people out watching birds haven't got a connection at the time, but no, it's all downloaded. The firmware keeps getting updated, but it downloads all of this information to the binoculars. So I thought that was pretty impressive, and it just goes to show that we do talk down AI sometimes because we're a bit scared about it. But things like this, if you are interested in your birds and you just don't know how to identify them, at this stage has got about 9,000 bird species loaded on the binoculars. Now, when we talked about 7,845 identified on the Global Big Day, then that's great. That's covering more than that. But there's more than 9,000 bird species across the world. But again, this will continue to learn. You'll identify something, you'll say, no, I definitely know what that is. So upload that, get that information, and it'll keep going. But it's just, I thought it was a brilliant use of AI.
Absolutely.
And being able to identify it just based on an image from a distance. Now, it does a few more things than that. You can take photos of these, you can use those, you can take videos of these birds so you can look at them later, invite your friends around for a watching video night. So you've got a whole range of things, but I love
Do you reckon
idea.
it'll help you identify an emu because you've just confessed that you wouldn't be able to spot an emu if it was up close to you? Yeah.
Well, if the emu wasn't pecking on my helmet, it would just be a bird.
Yeah,
So
just a
that's
bird.
it. Just another bird. Gee, it looks that bird's so big it looks like it's really close. It is
Big
close.
magpie.
That's right. So keep an eye out for those moustached kingfishers, those pale-headed rosellas, or whatever they might be. That's the limit of my bird knowledge there. Job done. Keep an eye out for those.
One of the big logistical problems for Australia is that we have such broad expanses of land between major population centres. So trucking routes, freight rail and cargo planes, they've all gotten us to where we are today, but the humongous energy expense in transporting goods is a fair cut of the cost for so many consumer items here in Australia. But imagine if we could just float these goods throughout the country. Matt, have I got my head in the clouds here?
No, but you might have some of your freight in the clouds at some stage in the near
I
future.
think this is sounding really cool. So we're not putting them up in planes, but
Blimp. put them up
Blimps.
in airships.
I think that's cool.
It is. Now, the other part is not just the freight cost that you mentioned there, but when you talk about some regional locations, it's probably more expensive to keep the roads in good order than the actual cost of the freight, because you can justify spending a lot of money on a road. And the rough cost that I've typically heard for building a bitumen road, just a standard 2-lane, as in 1 lane in each direction, bitumen road on reasonable ground, is about $1 million per kilometre.
Oh, wow.
So they're expensive to build. And when you've got thousands of cars a day, you can justify that expense. But when you're going to some regional and remote locations where you might get one truck every 2 days there, it's pretty hard to justify all the money you spend to build and then maintain these roads as well. And they don't like wet weather. So there's all sorts of issues there. But you want to get freight out to these locations. So a blimp, an airship, is potentially the solution. Now, we've got some companies that are looking at this around the world at the moment. And in Mount Isa, there's been an MOU signed between a company called Flying Whales and Mount Isa Regional Council to be the first cargo airship base in Australia. The plan is to have 160 of these bases around the nation, around the world, not around the nation, about 6 around Australia, for example. Now, they're not talking about sending goods from America to Australia on an airship. Probably a pretty inefficient way to get it there. It's really that connection between once you get it to the country, so you get it on ships to a port, and then getting it from there inland somewhere. They're talking about airships being used for that.
Yeah, so I'm visualising these things carrying 3 or 4 containers underneath them and floating above your head super silently.
Super silently. Now, let's talk about the physics of this a little bit, because I'm fascinated by this. Now, just for the start, we're not talking about a Hindenburg incident, 1937, obviously.
We're trying to not use hydrogen to inflate you. But it was actually the wood and the material they were using that was causing all that flame. The ignition, the hydrogen helped that for sure.
Yeah, but people get a bit scared. When you say we're going to have hydrogen, then they go, hold on, I remember that 1937 incident, and the images of that, I think 36 people died in that. The images look incredibly scary. So just to put people's mind at rest for a start, we're talking about helium.
Yeah.
So helium is going to be used. Now, the interesting part I thought, or started thinking about, was, okay, I've got an airship. Let's say the airship is 40 tonnes, just for the want of a number. They're 200 metres long, we're talking about these airships. So 40 tonnes for a start, I've got to be able to have enough helium in that to get 40 tonnes lifted.
Yeah.
You need about a cubic metre will lift a little bit more than a kilogram. So just for round numbers, 1 cubic metre per kilogram. So I need a certain amount of helium just to lift the thing off the ground of its own weight. Then I've got to add some sort of payload, but that gets tricky. Let's say it's 40 tonnes, and they're talking about these can lift 60 tonnes as a payload. So we're talking about something that's over 100 tonnes here. But when I let go of that 60 tonnes of cargo, I don't want the thing taking off up into the air. So
you're going to need some ballast, aren't you?
You're going to need some ballast. Now, what do you do for ballast? You don't want to drop the ballast, because then how do you get it back on? What they actually do is they have internal air bladders. And so they actually take air in. So air obviously being heavier than helium, they take air in to make it heavier, let that air out to make it lighter.
That's really clever.
It is really clever, because I was thinking about, what do you do? Do you carry extra weight on the end?
So by taking the air, are they then compressing the helium that's within the...
Well, they've got separate air bladders apparently. So, and I haven't looked at exactly how that's stored, but they would use some sort of compressor to take it in. But they've also got a few other things that are a bit clever. They've got 32 electric motors. So I started imagining, well, they're using some of these electric motors for lift, but that's consumes a fair bit of electricity. Like a drone, you're using all of this helium to take the weight. You don't want to use it like a drone. But what they've actually got is some of these propellers, some of these electric motors are used to give it some lift. So you might get it close to neutral buoyancy, give it some lift, and then as it starts to move through the air, it's actually got some wings as well to give it a little bit of extra lift to take the weight away from the drone motor. So it's a complicated process, because then you've got to reverse all that And then when you're starting to come and slowing down, we don't want it dropping out of the air like an aeroplane.
Yeah.
So you then want to use those motors to bring it down slowly and take some of that weight. And then you might need to reverse those motors when you take the payload off, or maybe they just secure it to the ground.
Well, I guess there's no surprises that it's a complicated process, because otherwise they probably would have thought of this many, many moons ago.
That's exactly right.
But, yeah.
So the idea here is 60 tonnes is what they'll be able to take. It'll travel along at about 100 kilometres an hour, so not ridiculously fast, but you can go in a straight line.
Straight line, yeah.
And you don't have to go up over mountains or mountain ranges. You don't have to worry about that road being maintained.
Yeah, so you're talking about the average speed to get to your destination, say 5 or 6 hours away by truck. You're probably looking at about 3 or 4 hours then.
And I imagine that it would be done much more efficiently because, again, the weight is mainly being taken by the helium, and then you're up in the air. There's probably not a huge amount of wind resistance. You're flying about 3,000 metres above the ground. So as you're going along, you're probably using a small amount of power compared to what a truck might use to move those
I
goods.
think it'll be really cool just to look into the sky and see this enormous airship flying over your head with these containers underneath it. That'd be hilarious.
It would look quite interesting. And I don't know the size of, say, the Goodyear blimp that you see at a sporting event, for example. That's obviously not carrying 60 tonnes beneath it. No. The reason this is so big is because it's got to have more helium in it to lift up that weight.
For sure.
But a 200-metre airship sounds pretty big to me. That sounds like...
It's impressive.
I often compare things in terms of when we talk about distances. 100 metres, I think about a 100-metre running track to visualise that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's that. And this blimp would be twice the length of a 100-metre running track. Wow, that's pretty big in terms of the length of it. And, of course, the shape of the blimp would be a prolate spheroid, which sounds like a medical condition. But that's the general shape of a blimp. And again, that's fairly aerodynamic as you're cutting through the air. So it does sound quite fascinating. By the year, supposedly 2028, the base will be completed at Mount Isa, and they'll be moving goods around the country via this method. So 4 years to wait, but we've got a bit of time to see how that develops. So I'm quite intrigued in it.
Watch this space. Now, mining is a dangerous game. No surprises there. Conditions are frequently dark and dirty, and the air is often difficult to breathe in. In 2024, modern standards for safe work practices have the potential to interrupt close-cut mining operations with some regularity, I would assume. So in situations that are particularly dicey, sending someone in to inspect a situation, it comes with big risks. But we're in the third decade of the 21st century now, so surely there has to be a better way, Matt.
There is a better way, and the thing I'm excited about here is that every commercial or industrial development for a robot means I'm one step closer to a robot in my house. I'm not sure if the market's there for robots in your house, but it'll be developed.
Ultimate goal.
That's it from my perspective.
So it happens in the military, it happens in industry, and then it happens in your house.
That's right. It's Seth Sentry's song about where's my hoverboard, dear science, where's my hoverboard? It's like, where's my robot around the house? This is actually an Australian company, and it's basically, as you described there, the idea here is let's send some mining robots in to work in these harsh, dark, dirty environments, dangerous environments, to collect data sometimes, or to do some basic tasks where you might have to shut down machinery. And they had a few examples there where sometimes in a hazardous area, if they're sending humans in, they say, stop the machinery. Mines have a very proud record of lack of injuries, lack of deaths in the mining environment, because it is a bit scary sometimes when you've got big machinery and you're underground.
Well, we do hear some stories on occasion about accidents that are happening in mining, but mining's happening all over the place all the time.
Yeah.
It's. I guess what's surprising to me when I stop and think about it is the fact that we don't have more accidents, because there's some potentially really dodgy situations that we have to send people into.
And we've
learned, see if it's safe.
Yeah, we've learned a lot over the years when people have died, and we've improved those conditions. But there are times now where you've got to shut down a whole range of machinery for a worker to go in and inspect something, see where something's at. So that's the first place they've used these robots. They're about 30 kilograms, these robots. They send them down and they say, keep operating the machinery. We don't want something to happen to this robot, but it's not going to be obviously anywhere near as bad as a human. So we can send them in and we think it'll be okay and not stop the machinery, because the whole idea of a mine is to keep pumping out whatever goods they're mining, so you don't want to shut that down. The second area, and this has been a good thing for this particular company, was that over in Tennessee there was a limestone mine collapse. Now, no one was injured in that, luckily, but after that collapse, they really didn't know whether they could put people down in there because they were concerned about another collapse. They were concerned about the conditions there. They were concerned in that collapse, for example, the wind that came out of the tunnel in that was a 290 kilometre-hour wind. So again, let's send some humans down there. We think it's safe, but if something else happens, they might not be crushed, but a 290k wind is probably not going to be great for you.
And carry a bit of a distance there.
I was thinking about my hairdo, but yeah, that might be the case
mess
as
up
well.
your hair.
So they got a contract to deploy 10 robots into the mine to go down there, have a look at it, inspect the conditions, inspect what it would be like to then go down and make sure they secure the mine. Now, those robots spent about a week underground, came back with all the information, all the sensors, etc., to say, right, here's what you need to do to make it safe to continue operating. And so the mining company there thought it was fantastic. They paid a large sum of money to have that, but then they could continue to mine. Obviously, the employees in the area thought that was fantastic as well. So there is a spot for these mining robots, and they're a bit different to military robots, for example. They've got different needs, different requirements, a bit different to robots that might be in a factory environment. So they are specifically made for the mining environment.
Yeah, it seems amazing that it's taken this long, but there have been some big adjustments that have been needed to be made to these robots.
Yeah.
And it's not just a case of just adapting something that the military's built.
And I think the first concern people might have is that the employees who are working the machinery underground now are suddenly going to be replaced by robots. Now, at this stage, the machinery is not autonomous, and these robots are not designed to replace their jobs. It's designed to make it safer. Now, not to say it doesn't happen where they do get replaced at some stage in the future. Maybe that's part of the plan, but at this stage, it's all about making those mines safer. So, fantastic. Let's see more safety in mines, but also let's see a robot around my home.
The days of having to wait for an organ transplant, that is, may be truly numbered thanks to the modern miracle of 3D printing. Fragile little blood vessels and delicate membrane tissue may have been a problem with conventional 3D printing methods where the object is mounted on a stage, but Matt, this new method blows the old ways, and I say that in inverted commas there, the old ways of 3D printing right out of the water.
The old archaic 3D printing methods you're talking about there. It is quite fascinating using sound and light, and some of that is used to actually make the resin curing a bit faster. But one of the things that they're using this for, which is not so much replacing organs in humans yet, that certainly will happen, and without a doubt we will see organs in humans being replaced by things that we make rather than things that we take from another body. But at the moment, the main reason they're using it is they're being able to produce organs or simulated organs very quickly for used in things like drug testing. So, for example, there's a new drug. I need to test this on kidneys. What's the impact on that? All of that, and say, well, we could find some humans and use them and get all the processes in place to be able to test it and hope it's okay. Or we can just run these drugs through what effectively is the same as an organ in a human and see what impacts that has. So they can do a lot more of that testing. And then it's not quite right. Okay, print another one. Let's do some other testing with some different drugs, so they can continue trying different drugs without actually having a human at risk as such. So much faster for drug testing. And obviously you can experiment with things that you wouldn't dare put in a human, but experiment with things for these particular organs.
Amazing.
So they're using on a liquid base, if you like, so it's on a soft base. They're using sound to get the refinements of those particular items, and then again, as I said before, using light to basically help cure that. Even the vibrations from speakers with the sound helping the curing rate, so they can do it faster. One of the things that's interesting is that they can get a faster printing rate when they're doing it. So traditionally, when you've been printing this type of organ, about 0.14 millimetres per second has been their maximum speed. This has been able to get to 0.7 millimetres per second.
Almost double the speed,
Yeah, well, many more times than double the speed.
Oh, sorry, 0.07.
Yeah, 0.14 up to 0.7.
Sorry, my apologies.
About 5 times the speed.
Yeah,
so quite fascinating. Now, the precision you're talking about here is 15 micrometers, and that obviously needs to compare to something like a human hair. But I actually did a bit of research on this because we often talk about, blah, blah, the thickness of a human hair. Human hair varies in thickness from about 17 micrometers up to about 180. So how can we possibly use that as a measurement of thickness?
Cannot be a SI data unit at all.
Exactly right. And it depends on maybe your ethnicity, your sex, the colour of hair, the type of hair. Some people, I've heard hairdressers talk about people that have got fine hair and thick hair, and I thought, yeah, sure, that's just hairdressing talk, but there is a huge amount of difference in hair. So no more.
Yeah,
no
stop
more.
talking about things as being as thick as a human hair.
That's right, because it's just not accurate enough for this show. So we're sticking to 15 micrometers.
15 micrometers. That's still pretty fine. That's pretty good resolution, yeah?
That's finer than a human hair, I reckon.
Finer than a human hair.
That's right. So this is where we're headed. 3D printing has revolutionised so much.
Yeah.
And then getting better methods of 3D printing.
Now, did I also read that they can actually produce this in like a water bath or something like that? So it's not actually fixed to a stage per se.
Yeah.
And they can print this and just connect all these cells together in a bath to make a 3D structure.
Yeah, dynamic interface printing is what they call it technically.
Amazing.
But it is seeing exactly as you say, not on a solid base, but on a bath. So you can actually get more accuracy with it, but also in that liquid base, if you like, you've got the ability to print fragile things. If you're printing something on a hard and you're waiting for it to dry or the resin to go off, then it's going to probably change shape a little bit, whereas in a liquid bath, you're there and it's supported all around rather than just on one side of it.
And just thinking of the intricate network of blood vessels and things that have to be a part of so many organs, we are stepping into the future.
And I know, and it's not this story, but I know we've done a story before where to get that intricate array of blood vessels and capillaries and all the channels there for blood to go down, they sometimes will use an ice structure, and there's your network of vessels.
Right.
And then as you print around that, the
melts.
ice melts, and then you've got gaps there where you need to have various things flowing through it. So, yeah, it's quite fascinating where we're heading with things like 3D printing.
Now, I can get my dog to sit on command, but that's about it. He doesn't roll over or beg, and shaking hands is just out of the question. Puppy training took a lot more effort than I was prepared to throw in at the time. Puppy training, folks, can be hard. Well, imagine what it's like training an AI robotic dog. Matt, are you up for the challenge?
I'm not, but we've got a simulator that is. Lucid Sim is on hand for the rescue. And we did a discussion last week about saving hazelnut crops by having a robot dog that scares off the birds that are coming in.
But that robotic dog needs to be trained.
That's right.
And you don't want him pooping all over the place.
That's right. Go to the corner when you're told to go to the corner. So you've got Lucid Sim. Now, Lucid Sim creates a whole range of realistic AI-created environments, and then that's basically fed to the dog to say, learn about these environments so then you can behave in a certain way. And I thought, hold on a sec, don't you just have a pre-programmed dog that's already doing all this, and then you just say, download that? Isn't that the end of it? But the dogs are being used in so many different environments. So, for example...
And they have to be able to read changes in that environment that might be new that weren't programmed previously.
Well, that's part of it, but also we're finding dogs being used in so many different ways. So we talked about that story, scaring off birds. We know we've got Spot the robot dog being used in military environments. For police, we've just talked about robots being used, these weren't robot dogs, but robots being used in mines. So when you've got so many different situations, having an array, and this particular Lucid Sim has got 10 million images that can be used for part of the training. So you presumably would tailor the training to say, what do you want this dog to know? It's got a certain amount of memory. It's got a certain amount of actions it can take. What do you want it to know? Well, I want it to know how to chase a ball and pick it up and bring it back to my kids. And that's one of the training simulations. You can train it so you get the dog straight out of the factory. You run this program through with all these simulations, and then it runs off and gets the ball without ever having done that before. Presumably at some stage we'll get to the point where we've done everything we need to do with our dog, so we just feed in memory chip 17 and that's what we want this dog to do. So maybe Lucid Sim's got a limited life, but maybe not. Maybe we'll keep thinking of different things for it to do. And it's got all these different simulations. It's got staircases. It's got stone pathways that might be difficult to walk on. It's got obstacles, cones, storage areas. It's got cars. It's got people. All these different things loaded up, and you just give it the scenario and then train it on that. So it does. My first thought was, what a waste of time. But then if you start to think about how many different ways we'll use robotics in the future, and then again, it comes back to being able to do the housework for me. I want not a dog. I want a robot to be able to be trained how to do the housework.
What about one that can spot birds for you?
Well, no, I've got my binoculars now, so I'm right there. And I can actually tell you what sort of birds are attacking hazelnut crops once I get my binoculars out and start looking at those birds flying in. I don't know if it's good enough to pick them up on the flight path, but if they're perched in a tree somewhere nearby, surely I can see them there. So it does sound quite fascinating. AI-driven simulations to train up our robots. Fair enough.
Now, here's an idea that comes straight from the recycling bin. Before aluminium steel, aircraft used to be made of wood. Now, wood is a renewable resource, of course, and provided the wood isn't being burned, it's an excellent carbon sink. Now, we used to make reliable aircraft out of wood. Remember that. With that in mind, a bunch of satellite scientists have gotten together and had a really crazy idea. What if we made satellites out of wood? Now, that would be like everything old is new again. Now, wouldn't it, Matt?
It would be like that. And to be fair, there's probably a little bit of metal inside in the electronics of it, but the satellite itself made from wood. So right now, as we speak, only a couple of weeks ago, the SpaceX Dragon took a wooden satellite to the International Space Station on the 31st resupply mission. So basically, lots of information or satellites were delivered to the space station. About 2.7 tonnes of cargo were delivered, but it included LignoSat, which is the first ever timber-based satellite. And there's a few reasons that you like timber. The first reason is exactly as you said, it's a renewable resource, so fantastic. And it's a carbon sink, great, and you're sending it off literally into space, so you're getting rid of that carbon out into space. But it does come back, and this is what happens with some of these satellites. We're talking about small satellites here. When you make those out of aluminium, which they're often made of, then when they come back into our atmosphere and they're designed to burn up on re-entry, then you're basically taking that aluminium and turning it into some form of aluminium oxide, I imagine, and that's probably being sprinkled around in the ionosphere that eventually comes back down to Earth. So probably not great to have all that aluminium sprinkling around. In this scenario, the timber does burn up on re-entry, so we get the carbon back, but it's probably a bit safer in the way it comes back rather than having the aluminium burn up on re-entry. So that's one way of disposing with it. The other thing that I found absolutely fascinating, they did some tests on some different types of timber to find which was the best timber. So magnolia, cherry and birch were what they got it narrowed down to. And they actually sent those timbers up to the space station to see how they survived being exposed to things like the radiation not being protected by the atmosphere, obviously up in space, and how they might have changed shape, they might have shrunk, they might have modified in some way, shape or form. And out of those, they chose magnolia, but they used a technique called sashimono, which is a Japanese technique of construction that doesn't use nails or screws or glue. So this satellite is put together with very precise joint designs where that hold together. It sounds like it's going to fall apart. But that would be doing some injustice.
This thing's got to do 30,000 kilometres per hour as it scoots around the planet.
It does. Luckily, there's not a lot of air there for it to run into, so it's probably not having to survive a lot. But it sounds like a bit of an injustice to the Japanese art of sashimono, but it should all hold together with the way they built that. It sounds quite fascinating. The timber that they use, as I said, out of magnolia, is something that's been used traditionally in Japan for a samurai sword sheath. And obviously you want that pretty strong because you don't have your hands around that and you put your sword in and find that you're missing 3 fingers. So that obviously is something that's been used for a long period of time for something that needs a fairly strong environment, if you like.
So strong and light and UV resistant too.
UV resistant and certainly handle that. And also temperature resistant. As these satellites go around the Earth, it's going from about negative 100 degrees Celsius to about positive 100 degrees Celsius as it goes on the cool side of the Earth away from the sun and then on the sunny side of the Earth. About every 45 minutes it's changing those temperatures. So it's got to be able to handle that and the solar radiation, as you said, and be able to keep that satellite intact. We don't want extra space junk up there just floating around. So,
but of course the temperature's not a big issue if the air is very thin up there.
Well, that does make a bit of a difference. You're right there. So it's a fascinating process. And again, who sat around and said, let's make a satellite out of timber, and then everyone laughed at that particular person?
Maybe the first part of the conversation is, I'm just sick of making satellites out of aluminium.
Maybe. What else could we use? That's right. So timber is apparently the solution there. So it's on, one end's up there now as we speak on a 6-month test orbit.
It's an amazing world we live in. Now, in the event of a major oil spill, the cleanup is often enormously costly and can be quite environmentally damaging as well. In industrial processing and waste management, separating oil and water has exactly the same problem. Matt, there's got to be a cleverer modern solution to this junior science experiment on an industrial scale.
It is a bit like a junior science experiment. They should do that on Science Day,
Just trying to separate oil and water here.
And it's one of those things that you see a bit of rain and a few puddles, and someone's been driving there with a car.
Yeah, you can see
this,
that film, that rainbow film.
it looks beautiful, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But it just goes to demonstrate that oil and water don't really mix that well. And so when we do have something like an oil spill, or even when you get oil in a garage and you're trying to make sure that you keep the oil away from the water, not going back into the network of water, whatever that might be, the stormwater drains, etc., then you want some easy way to pull those two apart. But when we've used things like chemicals, they leave behind some impurities. When we try and do centrifugation, then that doesn't always work that well. So what is another method? And this particular research being done over at Zhejiang University in China is essentially using a dual membrane setup, and use it on a small scale, but the scalability is important. So on a small scale, take a dual membrane. You set up one of those membranes that's hydrophobic, so oil repelling, and one that's hydrophilic, which is water attracting. You put the two membranes, and then as you bring them closer together, you get the oil recovery and the water separation much better. So, for example, when you go from 125 millimetres apart to 4 millimetres apart, you get the oil recovery going from 5% to 97%. Now, having membranes that close together, you think, well, how do you do that on an oil spill on the ocean, for example?
Yeah.
And what they're looking at doing is basically building this out. So you've got membranes that are close together, you run the mixture through that, and it separates the oil and the water, but then you just build multiples of those. So a bit like you build a big battery by having lots of small batteries, you build a big unit like this by having lots of the small membranes close together and then run that through them.
Okay.
So it's getting to the point where they believe they can get a purity of 99.9% out of this without a lot of extra work that they have to do. So next oil spill, or even just in an industrial situation, getting those two separated, which has always been difficult, is more physics than chemistry, I feel, in terms of the way they're separating those two out.
Yeah, for sure. For detectives of the world, solving many cases relies on piecing together scratches of evidence to form together fragments of the picture of the crime scene. Just the right snippet of information from an eyewitness can be the difference between a closed case and all the speed bumps and roadblocks all the way to the horizon. So in a novel attempt to shed some light on a cold case, the Hungarian police are raising ghosts in the form of holograms to hopefully refresh somebody's memory and restore some justice, Matt.
It does sound like a fascinating thing. We still haven't got there with R2-D2 and projecting that beautiful hologram of Princess Leia.
But still, holograms, I mean, they were a thing that we got excited about back in the early 90s.
Yeah.
We haven't really done much with them since.
That's what I mean. There was so much promise there, wasn't there? But we haven't done a lot. But this is an interesting one. You've got Amsterdam's famous red light district. And I've walked past there, and you've got all the windows with ladies in there. It did feel a bit demeaning to me, but I'm bringing ethics into this show now. I'm just trying to stick to the technology here. But it was a fairly confronting process, I found, as you walk past that area. And unfortunately, back in 2009, there was a Hungarian sex worker who was murdered, and there's been working there in the Amsterdam red light district. And,
Yeah, sorry, I might have got my wires crossed there. So it's not the Hungarian police, it's the Dutch police.
Well, no, the Hungarian police are
sorry.
involved as well as the Dutch police. So,
Okay.
So both. But essentially, they are trying to piece together what happened. Now, you say to people, hey, were you at this red light district? Most males that I know at least would say, no, I've never been there at all.
I was just passing through.
That's right.
Like I think you said.
That's right. But essentially, you've got potentially people that might have seen something, but it might not have struck in their mind. So they've now created a hologram of this young lady, Betty Szabo is her name. They've created a hologram in one of the windows. And she's there, she's basically looking out, waving, and then it gets a bit frosted over and she writes in the window like you do in a car that gets a foggy windows, help inside the window so that people outside can see help, and really just trying to jog someone's memory. Now, 2009 is a long time ago, 15 years ago,
Yeah.
so the chances of someone being there that happened to be there on that night and recognising something or see something that jogs some memory is low. The probability of that is low, but this is where they're at. They're trying to say we've got to do something different, something out of the ordinary to try and jog people's memory, because so much in terms of policing, police work relies on someone having seen something, someone knowing something, some information. There's that good old-fashioned process in police work where you're just trying to get the clues. Now, modern police shows just use CCTV and DNA to solve every crime, but police...
It all can be done in an hour, apparently.
That's right, as long as it's done an hour minus the ads. But police obviously have got this great skill to be able to get information out of people, but you need someone that remembers something, someone that sees something there.
Well, if anything's going to do that, like a 3D moving image is going to possibly work better than any other way.
Yeah, that's
I would
exactly
hope.
right. Well, I hope so. It would be nice to get some justice for this lady, and she's got a son who obviously is no longer got a mother. It'd be nice to get some justice there, but it would be interesting to see whether or not this is potentially another avenue for police to be able to solve crimes, especially cold cases, because you see things every day and we know our memory's not great for a human, but sometimes you see something, you go, hold on, I recognise that. You mightn't remember that that person had blonde hair and was wearing a red top, but when you see it, it just might trigger some memory there. So I'm intrigued to see if something happens from this. I'll certainly follow up and in a future episode and make mention of it if anything comes of it. I really hope something does, but it just goes to show that we've got so many different ways of using technology to help solve crimes and just help in our modern environment, help the police make sure that everyone's doing the right thing.
For sure. Now here's a gadget to get your nostalgic nerves a-twitching. It's a teeny tiny retro TV, perfect for watching Gilligan's Island or the Greatest American Hero reruns. And with Christmas coming up fast, this little stocking filler isn't going to break the bank or overload Santa's sleigh. Matt, tell them about this cute little TV screen.
I don't like talking about products too much, but this one grabbed my
It's
attention.
coming up to Christmas and you've got a big job to do.
Well, we've got an episode to do about Christmas presents, so this is a bit of a teaser, if you like. But I just thought for someone that's kind of got everything, there's a company called Tiny Circuits, and they make, as the name suggests, tiny stuff. And I thought this was quite good, the Tiny TV. It's a retro-style TV, so it looks like an old-fashioned TV. It's got 4 legs sitting on the bottom of it. It looks like a CRT TV, and it's got a tiny little screen. And I do apologise for the imperial here, but about 1.14 inches is the TV screen.
Come on, give us the conversion.
Well,
no, TVs, we measure in inches,
we
don't
often
we?
do. That's exactly right.
Oh,
So we talk about a
goodness.
65-inch TV. This is not a 65-inch TV. This is a 1.14-inch TV. And it's basically got a resolution, 216 by 135 pixels, so quite small. You've got the ability to download some content to it. You plug in a memory stick and download some content. So you can watch Gilligan's Island if that's your choice. You can watch whatever you like. You can.
I just thought, I looked it up and I saw it. It looks like a retro TV. So
does.
You've got to watch your old TV.
That's
show.
right, you've got to watch that. And you could give it to someone as a present after having loaded some content on there that was back from someone's favourite show, Knight Rider or something from back in the 70s or 80s like that. But I just thought people are quite ingenious in what they come up with.
Yeah.
And you're sitting around going, oh, we need another product. Let's build this. And you think, no one's going to want a tiny TV because everyone wants a bigger TV or a screen they can watch, a convenience of that. This is inconvenient. It's clumsy to get the information
and all it
on
does
there.
is just play the TV shows.
That's
that you
right.
wanna watch.
I remember people had TVs, a cricket one time 1,000 years ago, and there was someone who told me they had a portable TV. It was like a little radio, but it had a TV screen, terrible vision on it. The reception was in and out, but you could watch the cricket on there if you missed something that happened out there on the field. And I thought, that's pretty cool. This doesn't do that. This doesn't actually give you live TV. This gives you whatever content you load onto it, but just a good little retro style. So there's a bit of a teaser for what we might have coming up in a future episode of our Christmas gift gadget guide. I think we got to 5 Gs last year. I've got to come up with 6 Gs for the Gs in the title of that this
Clock's
year.
ticking. You better get busy on
I know,
that.
I've got to do that one actually. So yeah. So anyway, Tiny TV. Have a look at it. Tiny Circuit's got a bunch of tiny stuff out there.
And on that note, folks, we're going to put a nice round full stop on yet another episode of Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. I sincerely hope that you're all feeling just a little bit more clever than perhaps you were about 50 minutes ago. And thanks for another cracking Tech Talk, Matt.
And you know what I'm going to do, don't you? Those binoculars. I've got to get those binoculars. So
Well, I reckon just get out there and start looking at birds and start identifying with your naked eye.
Oh, gee, that sounds
You
like
got homework.
That sounds like hard work. That sounds like I've got to use my brain for that. I've got technology to do that for me. But I want to participate in next year's Global Big Day and see if I can identify a few birds, not just magpies, with these new binoculars.
Maybe magpie and a kookaburra, maybe.
I tell you, I reckon I could probably do a kookaburra as well. I reckon
right.
there's and the peewee. I'm up to 3 now.
But the
I'm hammering it.
emu you're throwing up to question.
The emu. I don't see a lot of them, I suppose, but yeah, maybe. So 4. I'm going well.
Okay, well, this is growing
I'm
by
on
the
fire.
moment.
That's right.
Thanks for tuning in again, folks. It's a pleasure to bring you Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson each week. And of course, this one was no exception to that. I'm James Eddy, hoping that by now you've already found a like button somewhere and hit the hell out of it. Why not throw us a 5-star rating while you're at it, and maybe even drop a nice comment somewhere obvious for others to pick up on as well. I don't think that's being too needy. Catch you again in another week's time, folks.